This is a demo of the REST API developed for Nutch for CSCI572 of summer 2011, and it's developed by David Gill. And I'd like to basically go over the API that I've developed. We'll go through the tutorial, the Nutch tutorial, as it would be done using this API. And I'll also kind of address some places where I think that this project could go, and I'm actually pretty excited about it, so I'll get started. First, we're going to actually compile Nutch. Well, it's actually pre-compiled, but this will sort of serve as proof of concept that there are no errors. So we'll let it run, and while it's running, basically the idea behind this was to develop a REST API to do all the common functions that Nutch has. So for example, invert links, crawl, inject, all these functions that Nutch has, the idea was to implement this but allow users to access and use them via REST interface. So we're going to switch to the binary directory and we're going to run Nutch. The extension that I've developed is actually REST server, and we're going to run it on port 8000. So there it's running. So we're going to create a new tab, browse to 8000 Nutch, and we're going to see first of all that we have some statistics. We have 0 running jobs, we have 0 finished jobs, we have 0 stop jobs, and 0 error jobs. Now, the running jobs are the jobs that are presently in operation. Finished jobs are jobs that are done but they didn't have an error or they weren't stopped by the user. Stop jobs were stopped by the user, and error jobs were, obviously they had an error in them. So first of all, we've developed this kind of, it's an elementary interface, but it allows you to see sort of the REST interface in action. And first we're going to, as per the Nutch tutorial, we're going to set the regex expression for the applicable URLs to nutch.apache.org, and we're going to change that parameter. We are then, this corresponds to the crawl command. We are then going to try crawling Nutch. So nutch.apache.org, depth we're just going to do 2 and 2 just as proof of concept. Crawl this URL. So you see we get a crawl ID. Our crawl ID is 1001. You can see it going, the actual crawl going in the command output, and we want to allow that. So we let it go, and if we were to refresh this page, we would see that we have 1 running job. Once it's done, we will actually see that flip over to a finished job. So we see crawl finished here. If we refresh the page, it's a finished job. We can access the job directly, a crawl job directly, by going to crawl and then the job ID. So we see that's finished, the original parameters, the result code, and crawl. That code can also contain an error. So suppose you have nutch.apache.org with 30 written as a number, or written as a string. Crawl this URL, you have 1002. Let's go to crawl 1002. It's actually an error message for input string 30. That's an invalid message. So we have, if we just go to crawl, we can get a list of, an XML list of all the jobs that have ever been executed. If we go back and we refresh, we get 1 error job and 1 finished job. So what we can do now is we can actually, let's get rid of this directory, we can actually do, like the tutorial, we can go through now and we can do this part because we have all the functions. So let's first of all inject nutch.apache.org into the crawl database. Inject. So 1003 we see, 1003 should be done. We go to nutch inject 1003, finished. Okay. Now we want to generate the segments. So let's do, I don't know, 100. So we generate segments. And we see that the segment is being generated. crawl segments. Then we go to the fetch list from this directory here. It would be relative fetch. We see finishing thread, fetcher, fetcher finished. Then we want to update that directory. We see the crawl DB update is finished. Parse entries. We see that parse segment is now finished. We invert the links. Now, for sake of simplicity, I have not actually installed Solr, so this won't actually output, but it will run the Solr indexer in Nutch, so it should actually work. I have tested it previously, but I don't have it installed at this moment. Now, one thing that's really cool about this is that you can split it up. I have, for the sake of simplicity, not included common things or common parameters such as crawl/crawldb. Theoretically speaking, it would be it's a minor tweak, just for the sake of simplicity, minor tweak to get that value as well from the API. We could easily have the API include that value as well. But the idea is to kind of make this a little more accessible to beginners as well. And if we look, we've generated the link database, we have the part, we have the data index, we have everything necessary. So one benefit about REST, or one interesting thing about REST, is that we also should be able to stop the crawl. What about if we did this? We did depth 100. We don't actually want 100. Obviously, we meant to enter in 10, let's say. This crawl's going to take too long. So we crawl. We have 1009. What we can do is 1009 stop. And it will stop, if you'll notice. The output ceases. It returns true because that job exists and we wanted it stopped. So if we do 1009, we have the job state was stopped. So if we go back to Nutch, we have 1 stop job, 7 finish jobs, 1 error job, and nothing running at this exact moment. So in summary, basically we can control Nutch via a web interface. We can do everything essentially. I mean, it's a simplified version because, for the sake of brevity, not to keep adding crawldb, but to get this parameter within RESTlet, or to get this parameter via web interface, would really not be a particularly challenging job. We can really control Nutch completely from a web interface, and we can even stop jobs if we don't like you know what our parameters are. We can even inject URLs, generate segments. We can do everything that Nutch demands, with the exception of running a custom class, basically, and everything that Nutch demands via this web interface. Now, in future, I'm actually very excited about this project because I feel that it would serve 2 purposes. Number one, it would make it more easily integratable with web systems. I know Apache Nutch 2.0 is looking to have a REST API. This would actually allow a simple REST API for the current version of Nutch that is actually stable. But also, too, I was thinking that it would be awesome, develop this a bit more, make it look a little nicer. It'd be great for beginners, too, who may be intimidated by the command line, who may be intimidated by, installing, configuring Nutch, and may appreciate a simple web interface that they log in, localhost 8000 Nutch, and they actually can adjust, their crawler name, their crawl parameters, their internet crawl. They can inject the URLs via simple, just type it in. I really think that this is an awesome way to control Nutch, and I'm really excited about it. And I'm actually looking to develop this further, even after the class is done. So thank you very much, and great class.